not campaign promises. At a moment when British Columbia feels economically fragile and politically divided, Black's pitch is straightforward. Experience matters. Iain, welcome to the show.
Dan, thanks so much for having me, and good day to all of your many viewers.
Oh, thank you, Iain. And Iain, let's start with the beginning because a lot of people have heard the name Iain Black, but don't know actually the story. Who are you? Where did you grow up? And what shaped your worldview before politics even entered the picture?
Wow, the worldview question. I haven't been asked that one. Well, you know, I'm the proverbial son of poor immigrants to this country. Mom and dad, they weren't destitute by any stretch, but they showed up after being married 9 days. They arrived in Canada and they had a 2 year adventure in mind. They had their worldly possessions in one hand and a 2 year contract with the Winnipeg School Division in the other. So they thought they'd come to Canada for a couple of years. They were both school teachers, and in my mom's case, the first woman in the whole family tree to go to university. And that 2 years lasted a long time because 37 years later, dad retired from that same school in Winnipeg. And I followed in those footsteps. As a newlywed, I came to British Columbia almost 33 years ago. With IBM, I'm a tech guy. I started with IBM, was there 6 or 7 years. And I also thought I'd be here for 2 years. IBM was famously stood for I've been moved. And so the thinking was they'd have me in Vancouver for a couple of years and then move me to Toronto, which is typically what happened with us as young fellas who had a bit of an upward trajectory because we were pretty good at what we were doing. And instead of going to Toronto, I stayed with IBM until basically mid 96 when the internet was exploding. And I got out of IBM as a young sales guy who kind of knew what I was doing and decided I wanted to learn how to run my own business. So that took me down a path of eventually becoming CEO of 6 or 7 different companies. And the pattern I developed and the expertise I developed was stepping into highly dysfunctional situations that had the wrong strategy, the wrong product, the wrong people, and they were hemorrhaging money, which sounds a lot like BC at the moment, actually. And that was my expertise I developed. And I was the guy they called when things were not going well. And you mentioned the word discipline in your intro, and it is. It's about discipline, it's about focus, it's about making the tough decisions and executing on them. It's about building great teams, it's about assessing people. And through all of that, I developed a reputation as a guy who could actually achieve these things. So I like to joke, I haven't lost one yet in terms of those companies. But in the middle of that, I got interrupted by a phone call that invited me to compete for the nomination in what was Gordon Campbell's second of 3 terms in government. So 2005 and then 2009. I won the nomination and I won the election. I became Gordon Campbell's youngest MLA, and he took a risk on me. He threw me on the provincial treasury board and taught me how to build what is now a 90 billion odd a year budget, and the really big decisions you have to make there, and the complexity of them, and the mechanics of them, which is very, very complex. And then promoted me from there into actually being his youngest cabinet minister. And as you pointed out, I had a series of economic portfolios. Went back into business through the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, and then back fully into technology, working at Maximizer. So I thought my time in politics was done. I didn't think you and I would be sitting here talking right now, but I became desperately concerned about the state of our country and the state of our province in particular. We have lost our way. We've lost our way financially, and I think we've lost our way with the trust and relationship with the 5.7 million people who live here. And this NDP government in particular has gone down some, I think it's safe to use the word ideological paths that have got us into a lot of trouble. I mean, DRIPA is a disaster, and it is having implications that extend into the already disastrous economic situation that this government has created. So you go to healthcare, you go to education, show me a file that's better than it was 9 years ago. It's just not. So I'm proud to be in this contest. I'm thrilled with my team and most grateful to them. We're doing well. We're highly competitive in the race. We know we've got a shot at it. The memberships are being sold, and the reception that we're getting when I go on the road and travel, which I'm starting on the road again tomorrow after being home for a week, and I'm looking forward to it, has been terrific. So there, I'll pause there because it's I'm just having a lot of fun. It's really, really a privilege to be in this contest, and it's gratifying to know I got a shot at winning it.
One thing I do notice about you is you're very high energy. This isn't the first time we've met. We met at the CPC convention.
Yeah.
And one thing and you were very hard to tie down. I will say that you were very hard to tie down. But respectfully, you were talking to everyone, and a lot of people there were having, they were there for fun times. They were hanging out at the bar. One thing I noticed about you is you were always at the table with someone, and you were always there listening to someone. I watched a lot of the leaders that were there, And yes, there were some people that were talking, but one thing I noticed about you is it almost seemed like you knew what the stakes were for this province. It's kind of what I got from you is you're very pensive when you were listening to people, and I'd like to get into that because was I reading that right? Because it almost seemed like you understood what the stakes were.
Well, I think, well, thank you. That's a generous observation, and I'll take it. I think there's a couple of pieces to that. Number one, you're right. I love people. Like it's a trite thing to say. I realize, but the one thing I loved about being elected, 50 odd years ago, is the engagement is fun for me. Like I find people interesting. Everyone's got a story. Everyone wants to be heard. And I mean, I could talk a mile a minute. I speak very, very quickly. But listening and actually hearing people is a big part of the job, but it's also for me a big part of who I am. I really enjoy it. I mean, it's not a trite thing. I don't think I'm doing anybody any favors by listening to them. I get something out of it. And so that is one part of what you observe. The other part of it is I think I've been successful leading organizations and leading people because I approach every day with this balance of humility and confidence. Like I know what I know. I know how to lead stuff. I've done it. I'm trained at it. I've got my own philosophies and principles I've developed, and they work. But I also, that humility thing is really important. I believe that every day has a teachable moment. And if you don't believe that, you're just not paying attention because it's true. So when you see me engaging like that, I actually do want to hear what people are saying because I want to make sure that I'm not missing something, that my own preconceived notions can be tested, they can be challenged, and I can adjust them when I learn new information. So to me, that's just part of the human experience, but it reflects well in the way I like to lead.
Right. And respectfully, I think that that's great, and I think that when I watched you on the floor, it's one thing I will say is if I was going to hire someone, I'd want to hire with someone that was as engaged as you were at that CPC party. So I respectfully, it was an observation that I did take away from that. I'm going to take you back to your time in Gordon Campbell's government and your experience there. And you mentioned that you can lead teams and that experience matters. We've all seen like what the past, the BC Conservative Party is. Let's just say we have a very frustrated base. And, the BC Conservative Party, many would say that the BC Conservative Party is an indictment of the last party. It's not an evolution, it's an indictment because if that was the case, the BC United experiment wouldn't have imploded the way it did. So that brings me back to my question to you is you have this experience with the BC Liberal Party and it was a party that won. It was a party that had a caucus that was used to winning. You're going to come in and let's just say you're leading. You're going to have a very different caucus than the one with Gordon Campbell. And what I mean by that is they're not used to that. They're not used to, well, if we win, we're disciplined and we're going to go in line with that. They haven't experienced that yet. So my question to you is, how do you get this caucus on board with your vision?
There's lots to unpack there. You could go a few different ways. Let me.
Sorry.
No. The preamble's great. It's just you paint the fabric of the question well. I think first of all, the BC Liberals that I was involved in was not the same BC Liberals that the political dynasty, if you want to call it that, of 17 years that was driven off the cliff by those running it at the time. It was a different entity then. I mean, first of all, 2/3 of us were card-carrying conservatives, right? I mean, we were part of that proud Canadian tradition of coalition governments. And the Manitoba Conservatives, where I grew up, Manitoba Conservatives were red guys and blue guys who bashed each other's heads in at the federal election, and then afterwards came back together, hold hands, sing kumbaya, and then go take on the NDP provincially to keep them out of office. Saskatchewan Party, same thing. And the BC Liberals was like that too. I mean, it kind of inherited the name. In many ways, repeating history to where we are now. I mean, the BC Liberals kind of like evolved in this beast that if you go back to the early 1990s before I actually moved here, it was, the spin-off from kind of the whole Socrat implosion, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a history there that we could all learn from. But it changed its name or felt compelled to change its name for a reason. There were a whole bunch of people who were card-carrying conservatives who didn't want to be called liberals anymore. And you still see that narrative now with some of the conservatives in our own team who are saying, you know what, we had those who want to vote federal liberal, they can kind of suck it up and vote for us for a change. And there's that banter going around, which you've alluded to a wee bit as well, and in the kind of tone and culture of the place. So the history there, I think, is important to point out. The challenge that you've identified is very, very real, and why the outcome of this contest matters so much. we picked the wrong leader. The caucus is going to eat him alive. If you've got a deep lineage with the BC United, this is not going to be helpful because the acrimony is real, and there's a lot of people in that room who are very proud of not having an affiliation with it. So how are you going to lead that group of people if you've got a strong ties to it, right? That's a very, very real question that needs to be contemplated. We could be setting somebody up for failure if we're not careful. In my case, what I've done when I take over a company, I inherit a group of people who's not on the same page. If they were, the company probably wouldn't need my services. And you get everybody on the same page. First of all, going back to your first question, by doing a lot of listening. You've got to engage with people where they are. Why are they there? What matters to them? Why did they run for public office? What do they think government looks like? What is the personal contribution they want to make within their riding into the province of British Columbia and the broader Canadian fabric? You get into those conversations with people and you'll start seeing some patterns. And out of those patterns will fall the 3, 4, or 5 things that we all see commonly, we all want to achieve together. And we can wrap a narrative around that, call it an election platform if you like, that we can take to the people of BC and say, listen, this is what we stand for. This is what you can expect from us. And this is the vision and the aspiration we have for the families who live here, all 5.7 million of us. And it is my view that especially the backdrop of the very poor performance, disastrous economically, disastrous with respect to First Nations and DRIPA, the background or the backdrop of this NDP government clearly coming to its end of life, that we are going to earn the trust of British Columbians to give us a shot at getting things back on track.
Right, right. No, and I respectfully that's great. One thing I wanted to kind of come back to you is, the frustration of the base, the antithesis of the Conservative Party, and I'm glad that listening is great, but I also think that we need to listen to the people's frustrations as well. And I understand that, like, you made a remark before about purity tests and said that they're destructive and not at all helpful to building the team. And I think, I've talked to past leaders before, and I'm like, well, they're not really, when they're voicing their frustrations, it's not usually A, it means B. And my
Mhm.
comment to you is what did you note about, I want to take you back to what you said, kind of get an explanation on the purity test comment, but also want to know, like, what you think about what these people are actually saying about this when they do say, purity tests in general. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, the second half of it is a really, really important element to the answer, because I think it actually, I'd start there. Because when people say to me, or Daniel, I've witnessed the conversation more than it's being pointed at me, because I've got a pretty clear conservative lineage going back to, the first sign of my lawn was for the Reform Party.
Sure.
I think somebody posted something online that my donations to the Federal Conservative Party, once all the evolution happened with Reform, was 2005, and steadily ever since.
Right.
I've raised money for these guys. I was asked to run for Andrew Scheer and for Aaron O'Toole. I declined. I chaired the campaign in 2001 for a local riding. I ran as an acclaimed candidate for Pierre last year in the 2025 election, and I still sit on the National Economic Council with 30 other leading CEOs in this country. So my bona fides are pretty intact. But that's actually, Dan, why I get to answer this question with some not impunity, but certainly some credibility, because I do think the purity test conversation is not helpful. Because when you ask that question, are you a real conservative? What does that mean? What does that mean? Because the person asking it has, to your point, has a frame of reference. They in
Right.
their mind, the conservative means something, and to some of them, it might mean low taxes. Another might mean really small government, just so we can provide the sacrosanct services of healthcare and education and looking out for the most vulnerable. It could be a government that stays out of your religion and your bedroom. It could be a government that is low in regulation, pave the way and get out of the way. It could be ideological in the sense of, we do better decisions with our money than government does. There's all kinds of things it could mean depending on the person who's asking the question. So that's why purity tests are dangerous, because it's a bit of a setup. It's like saying, are you a real Canadian? Well, what does that mean exactly? Like,
Right.
is it
Right.
a hockey reference? Is it a back bacon reference? Is it Vimy Ridge? What are we talking about? So that's why I struggle with it, because it at the end of the day, conservatives are brought together by a belief in 5, 6, 7, 8 basic principles. And importantly, and this is actually, I think, the most important part of the answer with modesty, one of the things that makes us conservatives is we're not afraid to agree to disagree. We can actually, we're not afraid because we're typically very passionate about free speech. We would much rather say, you know what, I'm not with you on that one, Dan. I just don't agree with you. But by God, I'll defend your right to say what you just said. And the fact we can do so respectfully and put it on the table and not hide behind stuff and be cute about the conversation, that's one of the things that makes us conservatives. And that's why that we talk about a big tent. It's a big tent because not everybody in it is going to agree on 50 out of 50 things, maybe not even 20 out of 20. And that's okay. We have a common
No, and
interest.
that's a great no, and that's a great answer. And I mean, I think my point is that we're always when people are saying purity tests, I think that at the end of the day, they're always signaling something else. And I'm glad that you brought it because again, like
Yeah.
you're making you're threading the needle. If you understand what I'm saying, is that when people are saying that, they want to know that you're listening to them. Like, okay, well, are you a conservative? What does that mean to you? And I think that
Yeah.
that's very important because again, it is different to everyone. My view of a conservative is probably different from my neighbor's view of it
Yeah.
and vice versa. So I think it's very important that when we're listening to especially people is that we're understanding that like it's not necessarily, and there's this meme online, it's not necessarily always about the pasta. You know what I mean? Like it's always about something else. So I think that we have to always thread that needle, especially when we're listening to people. And I think like when people were talking about like Rustad resign, people were frustrated with John Rustad, but I think that more importantly they were frustrated with the direction of the party. What are you doing? The Lindsay Shepherd, when she was let go, is a great example. She represented the antithesis of free speech within the party. Her roots go back to when she challenged gender pronouns as a TA, and she legitimized the Conservative Party. And I think when people look at the antithesis of like when they're saying something, I don't necessarily think that they're always saying what you think they're saying. And I'm glad you threaded that needle. I kind of want to take this back to your time in the Vancouver Board of Trade.
Sure.
You've seen the Vancouver, everything within the trade. And one thing I really that strikes me very interesting right now is this conversation that Sam Cooper is having and saying that we have fentanyl precursors that are coming from, then we'll just say it, China, and they're coming in, overseas, and they're flooding our streets here in Vancouver. My question to you, and this seems like it's from what I'm watching from the political class, is nobody really wants to address the elephant in the room that we do have a foreign country that is flooding our streets with fentanyl precursors. How do you, if you become leader, how do you address that without also antagonizing the diaspora community of, let's say, Richmond, of
Mhm.
of the Chinese base? Like, how do you do that?
No, I think you start by calling them criminals.
Right.
Regardless of where they come from. I don't care. I don't care whether the precursors for fentanyl are coming from California or Scotland. It's criminals who are bringing them into this country. And let's focus on the fact that we're dealing with a criminal element. We're not dealing with state-sponsored importing of narcotics here. And I think so that's one of the things I point out. The second is I think there has to be an appetite and an investment in law enforcement to deal with it. I mean, one of the biggest challenges we have right now is security at our ports. This came up in the federal election, right? And the fact that containers are not scanned. I mean, we outbound or inbound. I mean, there was a car theft crisis in Eastern Canada. Well, I mean, crisis is too strong a word. Crisis isn't. I mean, these are vehicles, not human lives. But it's certainly a
No,
huge. It's
but it all
a
ties together.
yeah, no, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. So, back then, one of the proposals made when I was running federally was, well, why don't we just buy 6 or 7 scanners and run every container leaving this country through them to find, oh, look at that, a stolen car. So I think there's things like that we need to step up to. Part of that's federal, part of it's provincial. I mean, we need to make
Right.
sure that policing resources down at the ports are where they need to be. We need to step up to some of the uncomfortable conversations around how the drugs are getting in, throwing a bright spotlight on that. But we also have to deal with the policing, what happens once those precursors are here. We can't blame the ports for the drug labs in the interior or wherever that are using those precursors and making the poisons that are causing the problems on the streets with our loved ones that are currently happening. So I think we have to be careful just throwing this over the fence to the feds. Although your point is bang on, I think we should be offering every support we can. I think we should be raising it. This is more than a BC problem. It is a Canada problem. And so I think there's a responsibility to raise that for sure. And it's funny thing about criminals. Once you begin making their life uncomfortable, they go somewhere else. And I don't think we've been doing that enough. And I think that's one of the challenges we have at the moment.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think that when we look at like especially what's going on with Surrey with this extortion ring, they were
Biggest thing I hear about history. Yeah.
we were watching them like record their shootings. I mean, how blatant are you to actually record your shooting? And that segues into my next question for you is that a lot of these schools have been bringing a lot of these students in, and I think there was a Globe and Mail article last week that tied some of these schools that bring in these students have tied these criminal organizations to these students. So they come in, they're given $10,000 to do an extortion shooting. What is your response to that?
I think it reflects a few things. I think, first of all, it reflects what are the challenges we had with immigration in the last decade. It will take another decade for that to work its way through the system. And what I mean by that, most of us know this, but for the benefit of some of your viewers who don't, we imported or allowed into this country more people in the last decade than we normally do in 50 years. I mean, it is disproportionately high. Number one. Number two, we used to have the best immigration system in the world. It was a points-based system. Yes, it allowed my parents into this country, but the biggest complaint I got about the immigration system when I was campaigning federally at one short year ago was from recent immigrants from Iran, from China, from the Philippines, from Korea, who were saying the bar was set for me to get into this country that was very, very high, and you have abandoned it. I talked to one guy, had two PhDs, one of them in artificial intelligence, one of the first in the world. And it took 3 attempts for him to get in and finally did so under a sponsorship from the University of Calgary. He's now one of the most prominent guys in our Iranian community in British Columbia. And they took him, it was 12 years ago. Right? He was way out in front of some of the most advanced technologies in the world. That's how high the bar was. And we've walked away from that. And we've now had an influx of refugees. And we have a role to play on the global stage. Of course we do. But we're bringing people into the country, or have been until the door was finally slammed shut several months ago, who didn't have education, who didn't go through security checks, who were not bringing an opportunity to contribute to Canada as much as they were, at least in the short term, a drain on our country in terms of the education system, the healthcare system. And that's not, don't misconstrue what I'm saying there. We weren't set up and ready for them. Our school systems, our hospitals, we did not properly land these really, really desperate people who wanted to come to this great country. We didn't put the resources around them to properly land them. So what happens? Well, you get, in the school system case, you get 14-year-olds showing up to a school, which is a firsthand story I know to be accurate. A 14-year-old coming to school who did not enter our school system as a young immigrant to this country, but a teenager who doesn't understand that you don't settle disputes in the hallways with a machete. It's not what you do here. And that was the cultural experience they brought to the game. That was their frame of reference, right? So, and then you got a school system that's going, I'm not equipped to deal with this. Like, holy smokes! And so you've got that. That leads to the scenario you just described. You've got people who've come to our country in fairly desperate situation, in numbers that we couldn't manage, and they are falling susceptible to the criminal element who uses them effectively as mules, for lack of a better phrase, to perform some of these crimes and get paid more money in one evening than they could ever make in a month or a year back home, probably sending that money back home, and then the actual perpetrators are nowhere near the scene of the crime. So sorry for that long answer.
It's great.
That's the complexity of what we're dealing with right now. And however, it doesn't change the outcome. If you catch these young people who are doing it, I'm sorry, desperate as their story might be, they need to go home, because we cannot let the world know any more than it already does that we're soft on crime in this country, that we're being mocked on a global basis for it. And that's just one example. They're recording their crimes. I mean, what kind of a thumbing of the nose do you give to the police and the court system in the country where you're not afraid to record a felony? So,
well, not even record it, like not only just record it, but also post it on social media. It's so brazen, like it's wild to me. I like, you don't post the evidence, but again, there's this lack of accountability that we have within our justice system. And you know, and I think a lot of people want to see, you know, a lot of people are frustrated, and a lot of people want to see change.
So let me talk
You know, you
about
mentioned immigration, and you know, and I know you have a better view of this than most people. Is right now we have, you know, BC, we have a stagnant, you know, building, you know, building right now is at it's stagnant. We're not building at the level we should. And at the same point in time, when you look at the Bank of Canada, what they're saying, like with housing and with the housing prices, is that it's a supply and demand issue. They've been saying this since like before COVID. We don't have enough supply, there's too much demand, and the prices are going up. And we've actually seen that here in BC when they've tapped the student program, that prices actually have gone down. I think that in Metro Vancouver, prices have gone down upwards to 10%. So there is a correlation between immigration and housing. But we also have another issue is we also have the business community saying that we need temporary foreign workers. So how do you balance the two? We have a generation that's locked out. Some people say that they don't want to work because they don't see a future in this province. And what's the point of me working hard because I have no future here? And how do you reconcile the two with the business community that says, well, I need workers to run my business?
So you just articulated the ball of string of dysfunction that the NDP has created here in the last 9 years. And I would actually daisy chain it from our previous conversation as follows. Why do we have the same number of we have about 1,000 provincial police officers in this province? Same number we had 10 years ago when we had 1.2 million fewer people. That's on the NDP. Why aren't we deploying better technology with our police forces in Surrey, where the policing is in such a disaster provincially, to try to sort out whether they're an RCMP or a municipal police force? Why don't they have the right tools to go after the extortion folks, whether they're drones, whether they're cameras in intersections that still stay on the right side of freedom of information and privacy laws? You know, that the task force and learnings we can do from places like Montreal, who shut down a ton of their organized crime efforts. There's things that have worked that we don't have to try to reinvent the wheel on, and we've simply not shown the interest or priority at a provincial level with the NDP. So we are where we are on that one. Now, separate from that is, now we're back to housing. So you blended housing with a few other things there, the temporary foreign worker program. So I would add one thing to the housing. It's not just a supply and demand thing. You got 5,000 unsold condominiums in the lower mainland of British Columbia right now. They're not being sold. And they're not being sold because the market's coming down and because they're too expensive. Now, why are they too expensive? Because for many of them, especially in the greater Vancouver area, there's upwards of 15 as high as 35% of the cost of that condominium is tax. It's something called development cost charges and community amenity charges, DCCs and CACs. And these are tools used by some of the municipalities, most actually, of the municipalities, and it's a hidden tax, and it's actually, I argue, it's blackmail, because you get the developers in the back room at City Hall who want their permits to build a little condo complex. Doesn't even have to be a big one, a couple hundred units, right? And they will not get those building permits if they don't agree to the city's demands about how much they're going to pay the city, ostensibly for the curbs and the sidewalks and the fire hydrants and the the things that the electrical, maybe the plumbing that's needed to build that complex. And the concept in isolation is fine, that development should be self-funding, that the broader taxpayer shouldn't be paying for that. Problem is that never used to be the case. It used to be spread across the entire tax base, number one. Number two, it has now been jacked up so high with no evidence that the money actually flows to what it's supposed to flow to, that you've now got, if it's $1 million condominium for simple arithmetic, and 300,000 of that is tax. It's not going to the developer. That's tax. The developer's profit is beneath that. So until or unless we get the DCCs and the CACs under control, which I've proposed to cap at a fixed percentage of hard costs of the unit, grandfather it, and don't allow any municipalities who aren't using them to start using them, and also put some rules in place around permitting, because the delay of permitting, like 5 years to get a permit to build a condo complex, give me a break. That's the same period of time during twice in our history where we've entered into won a world war. You can't build an apartment building? Come on. So the carrying cost of that is in the tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
So the housing costs are way beyond temporary foreign workers. Take me where you want to now. Kind of taking you off your original point.
No. I mean, it all threads together. I just my concern is that we have, until So I have a follow up for that one. Is what's the timeline in terms of how would you proceed on that? Like when do you how long would it take for you to get all the permitting down or streamlined, and at the
Yeah.
same time balance the immigration? Because right now we have so many broken systems. So what would the timeline? What would an appropriate timeline be for you to streamline the permitting for housing?
Yep.
And
Yep.
also balance the need. And it's not just temporary foreign workers. We have students. We have an influx. We have like you said, we have too many people, and we've already addressed this. There's too many people, not enough infrastructure. So my question to you is, how do you balance both? And do we need more of a say from Ottawa that BC needs more of a say for how many people we get into this province?
Again, you got 5 questions in there. Most of
No,
immigration. Not being cheeky with you. I'm just trying to untangle it
no,
in my
no.
head.
Let's
Well,
start. Let's start with the permitting, because everyone has these ideas, and I think they're great. But I also like, as a stakeholder, as a person that's run business, I always like timelines, and no,
yeah,
and that's
so do
the
I.
hardest. It's the hardest thing to. I can say something, but what's the timeline on that? So let's start with that. What would the permitting
Sure.
timeline? How long would it be appropriate for you to get into government and
Yeah.
streamline the permitting process?
So one of the things that makes my candidacy different in this contest is I'm the only one with the unique experience of actually proof that I've led something, plus I understand economic public policy, and I've actually been in cabinet, and I understand the mechanics of government. It's one of the things that puts me head and shoulders above the other candidates, because I actually can step into the job on day one, and I actually know how to answer your question. It's not theoretical. Part of my private sector experience is I don't get paid for process. I get paid for outcomes. And that's how you have to run government. So your question is bang on. So here's how I'd go at it. One of the first acts after repealing DRIPA, which has to get done, right? And the other elements of legislation
We will
around it.
get to DRIPA, by the way, Ian. We
So
will get to
I
that.
have no doubt. Well, it's the number one issue. People are scared, right? And the NDP's really screwed that one up. So
Right.
that is, but I put that right in the shop window, job one. But shortly thereafter, right, I'd be 2 things. I'd be going to the Minister of Small Business and Deregulation, which is the title I would give to that ministry, and I would give them 2 instructions. Number one is to eliminate the regulatory burden to a minimum of 10% below what it was in 2017, right? I was part of a government when I was there the first time that got rid of 55,000 regulations in this province. That you put each one on a piece of paper, that's a stack of paper 65 feet tall. So that is we have to redo that exercise because the NDP are brilliant at adding layers and layers and layers. So around the cost of building, the permitting process, and the delays in building, there is a ton of it in regulation. That small business minister will be given 2 years to get the regulatory burden down to 10% below where they were in 2017. Do not underestimate the impact or the effort involved to do that. It is enormous. Number two, part of that regulatory burden is the step building code, which is layered a series of additional expectations, many of them not at all helpful to the environment, to the community, to pick your issue. That is at every municipality around this province having layers and layers of building code, which is making it slower to issue permits, and it's making more expensive for the builders who are trying to understand why they're putting in, rain provision technology in Fort St. John, where right last I checked it was minus 22 still. I was there a couple of weeks ago. That's how cold it was. I know I came home to a monsoon in the Lower Mainland, and you're telling me the same step code. Come on, like the province has interfered in the building code, and they need to get out of that business. Third, the province also needs to get out of dictating to the municipalities how and when to build. Like that was done as performative politics by the NDP because they were frustrated stuff was taking so long without taking any ownership for the fact that they're the reasons it's taking so long. So they thought they could just drop the hammer on the municipalities and tell them how and when to stop building, and that would solve the problem. Classic NDP backwards thinking. So the mayors are mad, the councillors are mad, and oh, by the way, now the city halls, who are already trying to deal with your provincial building code, now have to deal with this imposition of political legislation to deal with as well. It's bad all around. Here's the one that'll really make a difference. The fourth thing I would do is I would instruct probably also the small business minister to impose on city halls the requirement to accept pre-certified building applications. So when you go for, you submit an application to building permit application. When you submit that to City Hall, that starts a clock that can take as many as 3 to 5 years, especially in the bigger projects, where you're going back and forth with City Hall to make sure that your application to build something somewhere conforms with the bylaws and expectations and building codes, right? Why not have it show up pre-certified? Why not get the architects and the engineers and geotechnical folks, anyway, the environmental engineers as required, to show up and actually put their stamp on it, says, we will certify that this conforms to the city of Burnaby or the city of Fort St. John or the city of Abbotsford, whatever it is, building expectations, and you just cut 2 to 3 years out of that process. And you don't have to engage City Hall on it, which means City Hall doesn't need as many people to take you through that dance. They can go and work for the private firms who are issuing these permits and speeding up in the first place. It'll take a third of the time, a third of the money, because let's be clear, the developers are paying for that dance with City Hall for 5 years. And again, that lowers the cost of housing. The other thing I would do is I would change the payments cycle around CACs and DCCs immediately so that they're not owed until the point of sale. What that does is free up tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars through the development cycle to make sure that the developers have got the cash to finish the projects. So there's all kinds of things you can do in that space if you understand economics and how it all works. But all of that, these become additive, and it changes the game, and it makes it attractive to start building in BC again.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought up permitting because you mentioned permitting here in Vancouver or in the Lower Mainland in BC 5 years,
Yeah.
and that takes me back to you touched on it is DRIPA, and I read an article, I think it was written by the former leader, and he said that permitting here in this province takes about 10 to 15 years. In countries like Sweden, that number is about 3. So that's quite the difference. And if you look at like Sweden, it's very liberal.
Is that from mine?
Pardon?
Is that for a mine? Like
that's for mining, yes.
Okay, for
mining. So how do we go from and obviously we have the issue with the First Nations people, and we have to consult before we proceed, because obviously if you don't consult they can sue. There's 3 parts to this question, because obviously we have DRIPA, you would repeal it. What happens then? Because we still have to consult with the First Nations people about projects. How would you proceed on reducing the permitting process from 15 years, let's just say 5 years, and at the same point in time, like, how do we consult with the First Nations people? Because obviously the Supreme Court's clear. They have a right to consult but not veto, as long as the consultation process is taking place. So how do we go from a 15-year process, because again we are dealing with a generational budget of deficits that $12.3 billion I think it is, and right now we need it's the public sector that funds the private sector. So how do we get these projects in line and operational? Because all I see from the Liberal government and this NDP government is a lot of talk, but I don't see a lot of action.
Probably the most frustrating part for me in the whole DRIPA conversation is the way that people are cavalierly, including, candidly, I mean, Caroline Elliott knows a lot about the file because she's got a PhD in the area, and
sure.
She understands the elements of how we got here. But what really frustrates me is that every one of us has said we're going to repeal DRIPA. I mean, and in my view, no matter how much you do or don't know about how we actually got here, is almost irrelevant at this point, because it is now a political and an economic imperative to do so, because the welcome mat for investment in this province has been pulled away. We are uninvestable. And if we don't get foreign direct investment to fund our oil, gas, mining, and forestry sectors, never mind the broader, mid-sized small business community, which is enormously dependent on foreign capital. We always have been. We're a tiny little country. We need money coming from other places to continue to sustain our standard of living around here, right? But that welcome mat for that investment has been pulled away. And because people are not sure about their private property rights, and they just see the whole thing as a big mess, and they're not exactly sure what to do about it. So they're going, you know what, I'm out until you guys get it all sorted out. So the frustration point for me is not the fact that every single one of us has said, you got to repeal DRIPA, although some of us with a little less enthusiasm than others. But what's next?
Yeah.
Like, it's fine and good to say you're going to repeal it. The risks are enormous. And part of this competition is starting to, you're going to see it in the narrative now. The shift is going away towards, we have some risks here in putting unproven people in charge of this party and potentially the premier's office, because this is not an entry-level job, right? Who is it that's going to take the phone calls when industry's phoning to say, I've got protests happening in the woods. I've got people on the mine site threatening to blow stuff up. And I've got problems in the oil and gas fields because the Indigenous community, who thought they had a deal because the provincial government told them they did, are now going, just a minute here. Now, where you stand on this is irrelevant. If you and I had a deal to buy your car or buy your house, and I take something off the table after you've perceived that we've done that deal, you're not happy. So there's going to be protests probably in the front lines of the legislature for 6 months or more. You're going to have forestry company owners and mining executives and the oil and gas guys saying, we can't actually get work done. What are you going to do about it? And you're going to have the unions, you're going to have the government stakeholders, never mind the various ministries. And I might add, you're going to have the Indigenous leaders themselves. You're going to have First Nations leaders, some of whom are going to be livid, others whom are going to be really, really mad, but practically wanting to sort out how to move forward. That little basket of goods is enormously challenging and should not be given to a rookie. And that is one of the biggest challenges that I have and frustrations that I have in the whole DRIPA conversation in this contest. Because everybody's saying, oh, let's just repeal DRIPA, as if we're saying, let's wash the car in the driveway. So this is a much, much bigger problem than that. So let's get on to it. What do we do about permitting in that context? Well, first of all, you got to draw a big red circle around the repealing of DRIPA and Section 8.1 of the Interpretations Act. And also, in my opinion and in my commitment, opening up the conversation constitutionally on Section 35 to insert the provision of private property rights so that this never, ever, ever, ever happens again. All right. So I'm willing to do all that. In fact, it's a commitment. Where you get into the permitting is this. It's actually a similar answer to the construction one I gave you a minute ago, especially in the mining environment. Why not have environmental engineers and geotechnical engineers and all the other folks involved in establishing the appropriateness of a mining application? Why not have all that work done in advance? And so it's being submitted to government pre-authorized. The private firms will do it faster. They're putting their name and their reputations on the line, just like accounting firms do. You know, KPMG, Deloitte, you know, PwC, MNP, they sign off on your financial statements. Whoever receives those financial statements knows on threat of that person's credentials that that document is a reasonable representation of reality. There's no reason that can't be done in our mining sector, forestry sector, but you got to get rid of DRIPA, because forestry sector alone right now in the coastal forestry industry has taken established companies who are used to getting permits, who've been doing this for decades, if not generations, are now have their permitting go from 4 to 6 months to 24 months to 36 months. And the only thing that's changed is DRIPA and a government that keeps changing the regulatory regime where it's not predictable and it's a moving target. You've got to give certainty to these industries and stop thinking that it's your job as government to engineer outcomes. It's not.
No, and I absolutely agree. Two parts to that, because I think that that touches on, because I was talking to one mining executive and he says, for me to expand my mine, it's like 15 permits. He's like, for my mine. And I was like, well, that's wild to me. You know, but on top of that, you also mentioned like getting professionals like Deloitte to sign off on that. Would you have like massive fines associated with them if there was like let's just say they falsified or intentionally misled like some of their documentation? Would there be like a massive fine that would be tied to that?
Oh,
Because
yeah, the exposure's threefold. First of all, yeah, you could fine them for sure, but that's, if I'm them, that's not my biggest worry. That's just money.
Sure.
Right? I'm worried that you'll take away, like if you falsify something, knowingly falsify something as an accountant, the chartered accountant, the CPA association will take away your designation. Right. You see engineers often wear the little tin ring on their finger.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they do something that is outside the expected code of conduct for their profession, they will lose the right to sign papers. And that is the same in, you know, any engineering or variation, any professional context. The professional bodies themselves will take away your right to actually continue your livelihood. So there's a natural self-correcting piece that's involved there. Number one, you've got the, you know, audits are possible for sure. You can find them at the government level for sure. But here's the other thing: mines are private enterprises. Private enterprises have shareholders, and
Right.
the actual company itself. They will sue you if you do something knowingly that puts them offside. You'll get, you know, the checks and balances and accountability moments are like 4 or 5. So I'm not actually all that worried about it, because the laws of the jungle are pretty good at keeping everybody honest in this stuff.
I like that. I like that. The one caveat I will say with engineering is that or anyone that's signing off is, if you get someone that's junior with no experience with a lot of people that are senior, you sign this off. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned it. I do know that there are some people that work around. But I appreciate the stakeholder comment. I think that is good perspective. You did mention one of your rivals, and I've kind of given you a little bit of a hard time about, not really a hard time, but I've brought up your past and your comments about purity tests. So one of your rivals brought up, they're saying, repeal SOGI, but
Yep.
6 years ago, they commented when they were championing it, that there was a MLA named Lauren Thrones that was saying, maybe we should kind of hold off on that. Maybe counseling is more appropriate for that. And she went on record to say that position was abhorrent. Now, my question to you is, why do records matter? And because if you're saying one thing yesterday and something else entirely today, why, as a stakeholder, why as a voter, should that matter to me?
Well, I think two things. I am concerned. It's one thing to say, you know what, I've changed my mind, right? You should be still held accountable for that. But let's not pretend you didn't. I mean, the challenge you've got in the case of Caroline, right? And Caroline and I get along fine. She's one of the smartest people I know in her
She's a
specific.
very nice person. I don't disagree
Oh,
with that, but I
no,
also don't want to be sold at charlatan either. That's my concern.
I have no bad blood with Caroline, right? And I don't want it,
Yeah.
right? But in the same way we started this conversation by you asking me about my history as a BC Liberal cabinet minister. I mean, you can see the photos in the background of my office. I've just realized that's in the legends. That's the official. Kind of funny. I'd love to tell you that was a setup, but no, those photos were there before we started this call. And I'm very proud of my history being part of a government that went from worst in the country to best provincially, economically, along every measurement within 4 or 5 years. I mean, it was the not quite Margaret Thatcher like, but it was an economic miracle of its own, and I was proud to be part of that. And we had jobs looking for people. I mean, we had the highest wages in the country, et cetera. I mean, it's a great story, but I own it. I own it, right? And I'm not afraid of it. I embrace it. And we talked about that at the beginning of our time here together today. But if you were pro SOGI and now you're against it, if you were pro DRIPA and now you're against it, if you were pro safe supply and now you're against it, you've got to be able to explain yourself, and you've got to be able to take questions in a Q&A manner, which is also not happening with Caroline, that are exhaustive. I do these meet and greets, and we did one in Surrey last week, and it was great. The dynamic was crazy because the pub owner, we had the upstairs part of this big pub. It was packed. It was great, right? But they didn't want us to use a microphone to disturb the guests downstairs. Well, of course, you got the music going. So I'm sitting there shouting to a very, very full room. And I did my little dog and pony, and then I had 2.5 hours of questions. And we were shooing people out of there at 10 o'clock. The event started at 5:45, right? I lost my voice for a day, but that's the gig. And you've got to be able to answer the uncomfortable questions. And that, to me, I enjoy it. I thrive on it. I like being challenged like that. So yeah, I do struggle with that. But why does history matter? Because I think it's one thing to say I've changed my perspective on something. Churchill famously said that he was challenged on his change in perspective. I'm a big Churchill fan. He's one of my three heroes. And when Churchill, he was challenged on, he changed his perspective. He said, when I get new information, I contemplate it, I absorb it, and I'm willing to think differently. What do you do when you get new information? It was a great answer, right? So if that's the case, fine, spit it out. Tell us what we're dealing with here. Otherwise, it looks opportunistic, and it looks like you're pandering to a crowd, and that's not all right. So anyway, that's just a comment on changing of one's perspective. But I don't have, I didn't vote for DRIPA, right? No. I wasn't involved in passing SOGI, right? I was horrified at the notion of safe supply and decriminalization, because it's led to a human travesty in every city in this province now around untreated mental health and drug addiction, which incidentally is a core part of our platform. Because I think if you solve that, you solve a lot of other problems.
I think, I suppose my biggest problem, and not problem, but my issue right now is that our province is, in my opinion, we're in a crisis. And you need to do the hard things. And are you doing what's easy now? Because what comes later is not going to be any easier. So I suppose that's why I ask these questions, is because this province, we need the adults in the room, and we need the people that are ready to do the hard things. Coming back to, right now, I want to kind of talk about the independents that are outside of the BC Conservative Party. John Rustad was, I think he did some great things, but you can't. You have to take some of the bad with the good. Because of his tenure, we had a lot of exodus in the party. We had the Dallas Brodies, the Tara Armstrongs, the Jordan Keeleys, the Amanda Bubelets. What are your thoughts on bringing them back in?
I get asked that a lot. You got to be careful being perceived as dodging this answer, okay? Because but there is a process. I am the only one in this contest who has been in the room when the decision was made to bring Brack into caucus. Two people who'd left. One was thrown out, the other left of his own volition. And it was a gut-wrenching 2.5-hour conversation with people very upset, a lot of shouting, a little bit of tears. And it was hard because when you are ejected from a caucus or you leave on your own, you are impacting other members on that team. And it's being elected to public office is a unique and shared experience. And until you've kind of done it, it's really difficult to try to describe it to people. You're part of this weird forced together family, right? And I use that term loosely. I joke about it. It's like your classic Thanksgiving dinner. There's a drunk uncle in one corner and a fist fight in the driveway. I mean, it's that kind of a dynamic that can creep into it from time and again, but it stays in the room. And when I was part of that caucus, we had 3 or 4 folks at any given point in time who had their toes on the door, who are upset about something, who are ready to leave because of what the group decided or something that the leader decided or a piece of legislation they disagreed with. It's that part of it's not unusual. And if you don't have the experience in a caucus at a senior level, you don't know that. You don't know how to manage it. So I've been part of a team that had to. So when you're dealing with the independents that we have right now, 5 of them, I believe, who left, either because they wanted to or because they were asked to, were tossed out. The conversation starts with the caucus. And if you've got a caucus that clearly says, we want this person back in, your job as a leader at that point is, well, first of all, if you clearly can't get there, you might be leading the wrong team. But presuming you can get your own head there, your job is to then figure out, how do I make that deal happen? And can I do it in a manner that keeps everybody happy? But the reverse is also true. If you get a group of people that says, not a chance, this person is toxic, they don't fit in well, they have crossed a line that we're not really interested in going back on. As a leader, you're betraying your caucus if you then turn around and unilaterally say, right, they're coming back in anyway. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have influence in the room. Of course you do. You're the leader, right? And people who are offering up their opinions, they will already be factoring that into their point of view when they share them with you. And if you're leading responsibly, if you have the experience that I have, then you're going to get people's honest and candid opinions. You're going to make people feel respected, even if you don't agree with them. That is a crucial part of this. But at the end of all that, if they decide, you know what, we don't want this person back, you can't invite them back as leader. That card is not yours to play. But here's the other one. If they decide, if we get everybody on the same page in that caucus, which I will do, right? Because right now, I think that caucus will eat alive a couple of my competitors, because you've got some very, very different points of views, and you do not have, in most of my competitors, the skills or experience to properly manage that dynamic respectfully and firmly enough so that everybody understands each other, what they owe to each other as being part of a caucus, because it is a team. This part of politics is a team sport, right? Let's not pretend it's not. And I can't let you down, and you can't let me down, because there's ramifications for that. And you have to get that buy into that. If you get that buy-in around 5 or 6 key principles and a code of conduct that you and I can agree to follow, and then everyone says, you know what, I want to invite back in, pick one, Amelia, Dallas, Eleanor, and say, all right, you guys want them back in? You're following this set of rules. You trot off down the hall, me or the chair of the caucus trots off down the hall to see one of those independents. And when they see that list of expectation that the rest of us have agreed to abide by, part of the decision for them is, can you abide by that too? Because if they can't, and I have a sneaky suspicion most won't, then they won't want to come back. Because I think some people do really well in politics as a lone wolf. Others understand that it's a team sport. I can't comment on the individuals because I've not spent any time with them. But observing them, I think that will be the crux of the decision.
Oh, fair enough. And the reason I bring this up is one of your competitors today kind of released a tweet, and Yuri said that if he gets the BC leadership nomination, he will not run candidates in 5 ridings to pave a path for BC one. Now, whether you agree with one BC or not, they are. I think some polls have them up at 5%, other polls have them at 9%. What are your thoughts on that move?
I haven't had a chance to digest it. For the benefit of your viewers, that came out like moments before you and I
It
started
did.
this.
It came out
This
like minutes before we.
yeah,
It
this
did. It
just
came out
in.
minutes.
You know, you know, you and I are pals. We've known each other a while, and you know, we disagree on stuff around the edges. But you know, I got no bad. Again, I got no bad blood with these guys. I mean, it's
No,
hopefully that'll still be the case when the competition's over. I haven't had a chance to digest that yet. My visceral thinking is this: I'm running to be the leader of the BC Conservative Party, to unite this party as one of the few people who actually can unite this party, and as the only guy who has twice been part of a team that defeated the NDP to form government. I know how to do it because I've done it twice, right?
right.
And if there is an arrangement with another party, my suspicion is whether it's BC1 or some other party that hasn't shown up yet, that's a chess move that you contemplate well down the path. But my obligation is to unite this party, to get it strong, to get it election ready, to attract great people to run for us who will do well in their own communities, and to, with that team, build a vision of where we can go as British Columbians that inspires hope in the people who vote for us, but more importantly, get more of them to do so, so that we actually form government in the next election. That's my principal responsibility. That's the job I'm auditioning for, is that job. And at the moment, that doesn't contemplate involving other parties.
I want to clap to that, Ian. Well said. Well said. Ian, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to go long form with us. These aren't 5-minute hits, they're real conversations,
No.
and people can make up their own minds. You build a case on
Danny, I
experience,
love the
but
back and forth. Keep doing this, man, because there's not enough people who do this unmediated conversation. Everyone's looking for that 240 characters in Twitter, or you know, the 15-second clip they use on TV or on the radio. This is really important because you're asking questions that require a thoughtful answer, and it gives your viewers a chance to see who else in this contest. When you scratch at that surface, there ain't much underneath it. So it's really, really important, and thank you for doing it.
well, thank you, Ian. I honestly I do this because I want to be convinced. I want to listen to everyone, thoughtfully and hear what they have to say, and see if they can make a case for me. And that's why I've invited everyone on this platform, and the people that there's only one person that hasn't accepted my invitation. And quite frankly, I have concerns. And if you're not unwilling to answer long form conversations, answer from your questions about your record, then you have no business, in my opinion, running $1 billion province. In my opinion, because if you can't answer these questions now, what does that say about when the hard answers need to be answered later? Because quite frankly, you're not showing the character or the grit to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I want to just say, applaud everyone that's come here. Ian, thank you so much. You've been very articulate. I love that last little bit. But anyways, I again, thank you so much. Again, you built your case on experience, on discipline, on having been on the inside of government and outside of it. Voters will decide whether this moment calls for a steady hand or something different. But you've laid out your argument clearly today. And that's what the series is about. No filter, no consultant scripts, just a candidate, their record, their convictions, and the question that matters: who can actually lead this province forward? Ian, thank you for joining us. And last word to you.
Experience matters, Dan. We are at a
Thank you.
time in our province where there are a great number of risks, and we cannot, as a party, take the risk in putting unproven talent into the top of the heap in terms of leading this party, because I'll tell you this much: the people of British Columbia will be far more critical of the lack of experience than the people of the party. And they're not going to get sold by tight sound bites or knowledge in one area, or the lack of conviction as to conservative principles because of a voting record in recent years. I dodge all of that because of what I bring to the table. Experience matters, and I hope I get the opportunity and the privilege of leading this party into the next election and really creating an exciting future for the people of this province, because I do believe our best days are still ahead of us.
Ian, thank you again. And to everyone watching and listening, this is The Opposition with Dan Knight. Stay engaged, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next one.